Terminology. Let's talk boat. So that we're all talking the same language. There's some terms we use in boat building that we all need to know. Most everybody knows bow and stern. It's also called fore and aft. Forward is the fore part of the boat, forward part, aft the after part of the boat. And the measurements, main measurements on a boat will be the length overall, L.O.A, and you'll see that on plans, which is the maximum length of the boat with everything on it. And it's what the marina will measure when they charge you for a slip. And it will go from your anchor, if it's on an anchor roller, to the end of your outboard motor when it's raised. It's the maximum length on the water that the boat takes up. The main measurements we're interested in is what they call length on deck, L.O.D, which is the length of the actual hull of the boat, from the edge of the transom to the edge of the stem. And the beam is the maximum width of the boat, is the beam. There's two definite sides to a boat. They're called port and starboard. The port side is always the left side of the boat looking forward, and the starboard is the right side. My dad taught me an easy way to remember that. The ship left port. Port is on the left. And you'll notice as I'm building the boat, I have my building stocks marked with P's and S's, and my parts are marked with P's and S's, so I know which goes on the port side and which goes on the starboard side. But when you turn a boat upside down, things reverse. Because when it's upside down, unless you're upside down, the port side is on the right looking forward. But it's still the port side. It's always the left side of the boat looking forward when the boat is right side up. Sometimes you get confused, sometimes I get confused. That's why I have P's and S's on the building stock, which is the port and starboard, so I don't have to think about it. The parts marked P go on the port side, the parts marked S go on the starboard. In timber, it'll go across the boat. I'll have a P on one side and S on the other. And the stringers, I'll have a P for the port side, S for the starboard side, and arrows. Arrows are always pointing forward or up. Now, it's up to the individual builder whether the up is up when you're standing there with the boat upside down or up with regards to the boat. With the boat upside down, my arrows will point to the ceiling because that's up to me. And as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter. But so that you know, when you make a piece, you know exactly where it goes and how it sets on the boat, which side it goes on and how it sets. And it's just a way of remembering that and marking your pieces so they go back the way that you fitted them. Building boats where we use stringers, which are timbers that run fore and aft. They're called stringers, and frames are timbers that run crossways of the boat. They have different names for where they are and what they do. And there's lines on boats that differentiate what those different stringers are. The upper edge of the hull, where the deck meets the sides, is called a shear. And the timber inside the hull is called a shear clamp. In a plywood boat, it's the upper timber that the sides fasten to, it's the shear clamp. The bottom edge of the sides, where the side and the bottom meet, is the chine. On the plan, it would be called the line of the chine. Like the shear here is the line of the shear. And the timber inside that supports the bottom, where the side and the bottom fasten together, is called the chine log. The piece on the outside is properly called the chine guard. And the piece at the shear is called the rub rail, because if whatever it gets up against, that's what it rubs on. I have an intermediate stringer I'm putting in this boat, which is another stringer. Stringers run fore and aft, bow to stern. This one is between the shear clamp and the chine log. And the backbone of the boat is made up of the keel. The keel is the main backbone, piece that runs down the center of the boat in the middle of the boat. This boat will have a two-piece keel, actually, what they call a composite keel. There's a piece on the inside, which in a plank boat would be called a keelson, which is a 2x8, which is the main keel. And this keel runner I'm putting on the outside also acts as part of the keel. So if they tell you in the boatyard, go block the keel, this is where you block. This stringer that runs down the middle of the boat. Also putting runners on the edges. They could be called bilge keels, but they're actually runners to support the boat on its bottom and to strengthen the bottom of the boat. At the very front of the boat, in the bow, is the stem. On the plans, this would be the line of the stem. The actual stem itself is a timber inside the boat that the two sides fasten to. It's the stem, and it's fastened to the keel. And that makes up the backbone of the forward section. The piece of wood on the very back of the boat is called a transom. That supports the outboard motor, and it's what the bottom and the sides fasten to. And the keel is also fastened to it, and that completes the backbone of the boat. And it's what we call the skeleton of the boat. Now the frames that go crossways in the boat, there's different kinds of frames. You'll hear me refer to the ribs. And the ribs are what I consider to be the freestanding frames on the sides. And the bulkhead framing, bulkheads are like the interior walls of the boat that go crossways in the boat. And that's what gives the boat its shape. This boat is built around its bulkheads. And the bulkheads have framing. They have framing on the sides and the bottom. And I differentiate that from the ribs, where the ribs are freestanding on their own. Across the bottom of the boat, the frames are called floor timbers. The actual floor of the cabin is called the cabin sole. The floor timbers, or floors, are the frames that go across the bottom. They connect the ribs fastened to them on the bulkheads, the bottom framing of the bulkheads, or floor timbers. And they support the bottom stringers. This boat uses bottom stringers, 3 on a side. And the bottom plywood fastens to the stringers, and the stringers themselves fasten to the floor timbers and the bulkhead floor framing. And that's what makes up what we call the skeleton of the boat. The keel and the frames and the bulkheads make the skeleton. And we also have cabin framing pieces to support the sides of the cabin. We have cabin deck beams, or cabin top beams, and I have a main deck beam going across here. Deck beams are frames that support the deck. And where two framing pieces come together, like a rib and a floor timber, or a cabin frame and a cabin beam, we have what we call knees. The knees that I use a gusseted knee. This is the actual knee piece itself. It's a typical boat knee. I call this a hanging knee when they're up above supporting a cabin deck beam. The ones down in the bottom connecting the ribs to the floor timbers, I don't have them cut like this. I just have them straight sided because they're easier. And for strength, they look a little nicer, and also they'll give you clearance so you don't hit your head on them, the cabin beam. Now this goes between the cabin side piece and the deck beam. And what makes it a gusseted knee, these plywood pieces are called gussets. And this is the width of the two framing pieces I'm tying together. And this goes on either side to sandwich two framing pieces and this knee block here. This is cut for a stringer, a cabin top stringer that runs along here. And these two gussets will form a very strong composite knee. It's where two pieces come together. It's to strengthen and support the joint between two framing pieces. These are mainly the terms that I'll be using to build this boat and to design it. So let's design a boat.